legal battles.
Yeah.
Star Wars.
It's all space law.
Like that? Oh.
And then bring out the book.
Oh. Is there another? I think this
Can't, don't shine the laser.
Okay. So basically this is like just about space law, so right now there's like none. It's technically anarchy, but luckily there's not a big population. So we'll start with like the current laws. Oh, this is a laser. Okay. So outer space legislation right now, really the only one that's properly ratified is the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. It was ratified by 98 member states, which does include all the spacefaring nations. So I mean that part was good. The bad part is the fact that it's unbelievably vague and there's no true punishments. It's all like upheld by the International Court of Justice, which is a voluntary court. So you can break the law and then say I don't want to go. So really, space at this point doesn't have a strong system of government. So yeah, and it's just saying that like you're not allowed, no nation can own it, but for private corporations, like I could just say I own Mars right now for fun, and no one can say I don't, and that's an issue. So I really don't deserve to. So the like solution or the fact that there's this loophole is taken advantage of by private enterprise and corporations. As you can see with like the spontaneous, like SpaceX, for instance, there's going to be explorations that aren't federally funded necessarily. They're going to be done entirely by corporations, which Article 7 of the Outer Space Treaty does kind of deal with, saying that if any damages are done, then the nation that corporation exists within is forced to pay for that damages. But to quantify the damages as well as to make sure that they're not using shell corporations is relatively impossible. So there's no real way. This is a really useless treaty, to be honest. So that just gives a lot of room for, you can just mine the moon basically as much as you want, and there's absolutely no one to say to stop, and regardless of safety standards, which then leads into space weaponization, which of course is a big thing. In 2002, the anti-ballistic missile treaty that was signed by the Soviet Union and the United States expired, which means that now anything but a nuclear bomb basically can be used in space. So that opens up new weapons, laser technology, whatever you want, and so it could be used as an ideological weapon versus a scientific exploration, which I think does not benefit all of humanity, which was the original goal of the treaty. So when you have this issue, you have things like in 2013, the Chinese blew up one of their own satellites to test their missiles, and it actually left a bunch of space debris, which can of course affect future exploration missions if you've got a bunch of broken satellite pieces orbiting. So in 1986 or 84, Ronald Reagan suggested that there was going to be an international space station, which was actually meant to lead to the hyper-privatization of outer space. It was a subtle move. In 1986, he actually passed a commercialization law, which allowed all resources from the federal government to move into the private corporations as well. And it changed it from, because of the whole outer space, no nation can own space. If you actually fund private corporations, I guess, like NASA, you can inadvertently allow them to do kind of whatever they want with government payroll without the government actually being held liable by the space treaty, giving it an ability to circumnavigate it. In 1988, of course, the ISS was complete, which I actually like. It's a good thing, but the fact that you can just kind of do whatever you want isn't speaking like the preservation of space. It's going to be difficult to preserve or set environmental standards if there's no real government. If there is a government, then there would at least be some vague ability to monitor, set reparation payments, and I guess make sure that there's some kind of environmental and safety standards for all humanity. Which moves into the UN, which has the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, which is a mouthful. It's actually really useless. So far they've created the Lunar Space Treaty, which was in 1979, so 12 years after the initial one. All that it accomplished was getting 7 states, none of which can actually go to space, ratifying it, and it was actually much more specific, but without the ratification of the major states, then it's just there. That's really all they've been doing. It's just deficient, really, and being effectual whatsoever. Still leaving a completely open framework for anyone to do whatever they want. So that's just furthering the subcommittees. Okay, so I'll just jump into, there's a lot of hypothetical stuff to go from here. So basically, my suggestion is kind of an aristocracy. So it would be a revision to the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs that would actually be made up of all member states that would like to join. This would allow corporate proceeds, like coming from Alberta, you can have the United States oil corporations in Canada, but they have to pay a small amount of royalties to the country that they're residing in. If you made it so that elder space was viewed as a sovereign nation that was internationally held without actually specific powers being given to specific states that have more power than others, you would be able to create, take a small tax off private corporations, not all of it, so that way there's no incentive, but enough to fund future space exploration. It would also create an open forum for all spacefaring nations to get together and discuss and share technological advancements, which, as previously discussed, like if the Chinese do go to the far side of the moon, you're likely to see those samples in a system where it was international, and if it was able to get ratified, then there would be a far easier sharing of technology if it weren't limited by ideological and state principles. The science should kind of be neutral, in my opinion. So this should just be an ability to own space that really just allows further scientific discoveries and generally a better cohesion of the world scientists who really shouldn't be separated by ideological conflict. But yeah, so that was quick fun. Yeah.
Who in your mind should take, be benefiting from the taxes?
Oh, so that would actually, I think, go to the international community. The United Nations, the Outer Space Treaty was originally designed to make space the benefit of all humankind. So I would want to have a kind of a buy-in, where you buy in with an agreement that if you have the money as a nation to put money into a technological facility, that would allow international cooperation. But if you don't, you can still join as long as you're not a spacefaring nation that's trying to profit off of it. Yeah, that's pretty much. Yeah. Sure. Go ahead.
Seems like one of the biggest problems with any making law in space is that nothing's really enforceable.
Yeah.
There's no permanent police force in space. Any sort of international coalition is toothless on Earth itself.
Yeah.
So
So-
you make the laws, but
The enforcement's the issue. Yeah. So basically, right now there's absolutely none. If there was at least set laws that are more specific, then there could be a case made at least to get forces utilized to punish or at least enforce reparation payments for those countries. At this point, since there's no laws, there's no ground, so you can't punish somebody for doing something that they're not allowed, or nothing says they're not allowed to do. As long as there's this kind of publicity and this kind of, we could get participation from the states that were all of the nation states, then you'd be able to actually hopefully, I mean, this is all very idealistic. Of course, the UN is not as effectual as it was meant to be, but it is publicized. Then you should be able to actually start working towards establishing a proper administration and a proper, jurisdiction to ensure that it doesn't happen. As for enforcement itself, I can't say which ones would back it, but much like there's genocidal laws in the UN right now in the Security Council, hopefully that we can establish something moderately similar. Yeah.
So I would assume that there's probably space laws applicable to individual countries in place. Here, the Air Force controls a lot of what we're allowed to do in space. But is there any? Did you come across any record of ethical type laws enacted by any individual country?
That's the problem, is that there's really none. They are set by the specific nation. So but the U.S. is going to have very different ones from China. China's going to have very different ones from Russia. And so when you have that kind of discrepancy, you could have two people on the International Space Station doing absolutely opposite research. One of them's safe and the other one's going to die from it. And there's nothing to say that that's okay or wrong. I think that, at least this way an international framework could be developed. And, oh yeah, I forgot to add also that if there was an external auditing system, you could try to avoid getting certain member states to be more corrupt and powerful than others. Obviously, that's idealistic again, but I'm kind of trying to do what I can. Yeah.
What about a comparison to Antarctica and the way that's preserved?
So the Antarctic Treaty says that no one can submit a land claim for 50 years, which is a good but temporary solution. It also, at the end of the 50 years, that means everyone can go back to fighting over it.
Right, but doing something like that, but without a ending in 50 years.
It's kind of asking for a ceasefire, I guess, and making it just so it's a scientific recession. But you'd have to have each nation willing to enforce that, and because of the profit that would come from corporations, resource mining. Not that there's not the same profit to be made in Antarctica, but asteroids do have much larger mineral deposits, so you're more likely to have issues with that, and circumnavigating. And if you get a country that doesn't ratify it, it's like the Antarctic Treaty kind of works because I think it was the scientific community that really fought for it. So you need a similar, I guess, push from the space program. Yeah.
Should there be, so should you have sort of, everything is banned commercial exploitation except you have to apply for permits to do this?
Yeah.
Or everything is open to commercial exploitation, but you have to apply to turn certain areas into sort of space parks?
Yeah.
Do you think we should go down one route or the other route, or some sort of combination? of
I
the
think,
two?
well, I do agree with in like Article 7 that the nation, that the, at least the initial corporation existence, first they can shell corporations, should be responsible to deal with that kind of stuff, and then they can vote the representative of that nation at the council. So whether or not it's getting permits, I guess that would still be up to the nation itself, because I don't think the UN should have too much control, or else that would like remove private incentives, and it's not that it's a bad thing to have other like private corporations like SpaceX setting up their own
Yeah, but if
stuff.
someone's like, let's go mine, Apollo 11, say.
Yeah, then they'd have to go through their, like, there could be a US system set up for that, they'd have to go through that and then approach the council and get a permit, yeah. That'd be my personal, I guess. And yeah,
So given the failure of the Moon Treaty
Yeah.
and the exploration of the anti-ballistic missile treaty and the general weakness of the UN, and the drawbacks of the DART treaty as well, I mean, have you looked at other models like the law of the sea that people cite a lot, or the Port Authority model, which is really in vogue these days for these type, or even the research park model?
yeah,
Which are more kind of grassroots, a little bit more less top-down approaches that make it more buy-in.
yeah. Well, I think what my only issue with that is kind of like international waters, people go there to do things they wouldn't be allowed to do in national waters.
Yeah.
I feel like if space tourism does explode, or we manage to get up residential areas and stuff up there, then you wouldn't want to have that outside of jurisdiction. You wouldn't want to have, and I mean, yeah, you can have specific moon-type governments, but it would be much more effective if there was an established framework of humanitarian, I guess, ability all over space. I do like the International Space Treaty and like port laws and stuff, but my preference would be something that's a little more rigid, just because of the fact that we don't truly understand the dangers posed, and without a set standard, then there could be risks taken that wouldn't need to be necessarily.
Okay, let's move on. Thank you very much.
Good.